We at Wealthy Millennial want to help inspire, educate, and motivate you to make the best financial decisions possible. With our straightforward, no bullshit approach, we aim to simplify the complex world of personal finance for the millennial mind. It might seem daunting, the idea of figuring out how much to allocate to your retirement, to have banked in an emergency fund, and how much should go towards paying down your debts. It becomes even more worrisome when you've got major expenses like student loans, a mortgage, and just trying to keep up with the ever-increasing cost of living. So much so that many of us just bury our heads in the ground and choose not to even face it. Although this might seem comforting in the moment, I assure you it's not the best route to take. In this episode, we'll cover how much money you should be allocating to all of your major expenses in life. We'll figure out the right balance that serves you best, keeps you motivated, and eases your worry. Where should your money go? As mentioned above, I've touched on three main categories. 1, an emergency fund. 2, retirement. And 3, accelerating debt repayment. These are the three major categories that relate to pretty well everyone, unless you're one of the few who came out of school debt-free. You lucky bastard. Emergency fund. Let's start with your emergency fund. Everyone should have it, few do, but it can really save your arse in times of financial need. Life is bound to throw you a curveball from time to time. This is inevitable. And when it does, these expenses can seem like a pretty big deal. It becomes 10 times worse when you don't have any way of covering the cost. Having an emergency fund has many amazing benefits. It will prevent you from going into debt by always having an account to draw on when unexpected expenses arise. If you've only just started budgeting, it will help be the buffer for smaller, unplanned costs that pop up that you forgot to include in your monthly numbers. Prevents job loss panic. If you or your partner lose your job, you won't have to resort to eating beans and wieners, unless you're into that shit, in which case have at her. It acts as a buffer for homeowners. If any of you hearing this own your home, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Although you should have a section of your budget specifically for maintenance and remodeling costs, there will be larger oh shit moments, like a leaky roof or a broken air conditioner. Finally, it keeps you at ease. It lets you sleep easy, knowing that in case of an emergency, you can cover the costs, or at least a portion of it. So how much do you need? Many experts say 3 to 9 months worth of expenses. So say your monthly expenses are $5,000, you need to bank $15,000 to $45,000. Now I know what you're thinking. $45,000? Are you crazy? I agree. The number does seem pretty high, especially when you're only just starting out, establishing your career, and not making the big bucks, at least not yet. Your emergency fund should only ever be used for, well, emergencies, like losing your job. If this were the case, you'd probably be pretty tight with your spending until you were able to find new employment. So in calculating your emergency fund's monthly expenses, keep in mind that this number should really only cover your core expenses that will let you get by from month to month. You're likely not going to be eating out, saving for vacation or retirement, or getting your nails done. You'll be pinching every penny, washing and reusing your Ziploc bags, maybe even cutting back on your washing machine detergent. At least these are the things I'd do, but let's face it, my pendulum swings pretty far to the side of frugal. Just have enough bank to cover your necessary needs for 3 to 6 months and you should be all right. Retirement. So it's pretty obvious that we all need to consider our retirement, no matter what age. Well, maybe if you're like 10 or 11 you don't need to. But for the rest of us working individuals, it's a key part of any financial plan and one that needs to be well thought out. How many of you have a clear idea of how much money you need to put away every month? I'm going to guess very few, but that's okay. Coming up with an accurate figure can be extremely difficult. Why is this so tough? Well, there are so many variables to consider, and many of them can really only be predicted as opposed to concrete figures. Just give it a little thought for a minute. You've got to compare what a dollar today will be worth in 35 years. You've got to have a general idea as to how much more you'll be making in your later years compared to today, affecting how much more you'll be able to invest. Will you be having kids? If so, that's a huge expense and will affect your savings plan. Also, how far will your money go once you retire? How long will you live after you hand in your final resignation letter? As you can see, there's no simple answer to the question. Moreover, the closer you look at it, the more it seems we'll need a metric shit ton, or imperial, depending on where you're listening to this, of cash to draw on in our later days. My advice would be to seek out professional advice. Sit down with a financial advisor who can help you go over and build a plan that's right for you. Because retirement planning is so complex and has so many ever-changing variables, many banks and financial institutions actually have a retirement specialist. Now, your CFP, Certified Financial Planner, can and will give you basic advice when it comes to retirement planning, but a specialist has a much clearer picture of all the moving parts and how each will affect you. If your bank employs anyone with this designation, it might be best to speak with them to ensure you've got the most accurate advice. Accelerated debt repayment. Most of us have at least some form of debt, whether it be student loans, a mortgage, or possibly a business loan. Getting these debts paid off as quickly as possible means you pay less in interest and have the freedom of knowing you don't owe anyone anything. When you couple how much interest you're paying on your debts with how much interest you could be earning had that money been invested, it becomes much clearer just how expensive debt really is. Imagine not having any debt. You no longer have a $300 a month student loan or a $1,000 bi-weekly mortgage payment. Now, imagine what you'd do with all of that extra cash at the end of each month. I'm assuming anyone listening to this podcast will be fairly financially savvy and that they'd allocate a portion of the additional income toward early retirement or any other financial obligation you might have. But you also need to live your life and do the things that make you happy. Perhaps it's planning that big Euro trip you've always wanted, or finally climbing Mount Kilimanjaro. Maybe you'd build a small workshop on your property for your woodworking or pottery hobby. However you choose to spend that money is completely up to you, but one thing remains. All of these things would be pretty tough to afford while still throwing a sizable portion of your income towards debts. The balancing act. So we've taken a look at 3 main avenues your money can take. But how the heck do we balance it all? After listening to each section above, it might seem almost impossible to have enough money to dedicate to each area, let alone enough to put to all 3. So let's figure out which ones we should focus on first and roughly how much should go towards each. 1. Establishing your emergency fund. This is so important and should always be priority number 1. Don't worry about any of the other categories just yet. Funnel all of your additional money into your emergency fund until you have your minimum number reached. It shouldn't take too long with all the cash going in, so knock this one out first. The reason you need to build this safety fund first is so that when you run into financial hiccups, and they're bound to happen, it doesn't completely derail the rest of your plan. It only takes a bite out of your emergency fund. It will also prevent you from falling further into debt because you won't be putting these pricey expenses on credit, but rather covering them with cash you've got saved. 2. Tackle your highest interest debts. Now that you've got a decent chunk of change sitting in your savings account, it's time to crush the debt that's been eating away at you. If you want to have your debt paid off in the shortest amount of time and pay the least amount in interest, start with your highest interest debts. Things like credit cards and lines of credit. Since you've already established the habit of saving, by building your emergency fund, redirecting that money towards your debts is as simple as setting up automatic additional payments with your banking service. Your paycheck will come in, a portion will be skimmed off the top and dropped straight on your credit card, and before you know it, that nasty consumer debt will be gone. 3. Evenly distribute the rest. So you've got your emergency fund established, your high-interest consumer debts wiped out. Damn, doesn't that feel good? Your credit cards are no longer weighing heavy on your conscience, and you've got money to draw on in an emergency. Talk about peace of mind. Now comes the time to split your income across each of the categories mentioned above. If you've got a clear idea as to how much you need to save every month for your retirement, then this is a good starting place. Put the money into your retirement savings and allocate the remaining toward any low-interest debts you might have, like your mortgage or student loans. Exceptions to every rule. Figuring out how much money should be put towards each category of your overall financial plan is completely individual. Although there are standard practices like building your emergency fund first, what you do after that is really a matter of personal preference. Maybe you're someone who hates having debt. If this sounds like you, then making your mortgage priority number 1 might be your best bet. It's probably not a great idea to put all of your money toward your home, but maybe you allocate 60% and then divide the rest evenly amongst others. Perhaps your goal is to make the most of your money by having it be as productive as possible. If this is the case, then taking a close look at all of your interest rates you're paying is an absolute must. Say, for example, you're only paying 3% on your mortgage, but your RSPs are returning an average of 10% annually. Obviously, funneling a large portion of your money towards retirement will net you more at the end of the day over accelerating your mortgage repayment. Regardless of which path you choose, balancing all of your financial obligations and savings needs is no easy task. Take some time to think about what's most important to you and build a plan you are most excited to execute. As always, you can head on over to wealthmillennial.net/blog to read the full article with all the links and resources mentioned. If you enjoyed this episode, please share the love. Feel free to like, comment, subscribe, and share with your friends and family. You can also find us on Instagram and Facebook at Wealth and Millennial. The more millennials we can help when it comes to personal finance, the better off we'll all be.
This has been an Evoke Media podcast.